Welcome back to the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. Last week, the International Betting Integrity Association released its 2025 Sports Betting Integrity Report. Included in that report was the number of suspicious wagering alerts increasing from 232 in 2024 to a 5-year high of 300 last year. Soccer led the way with 110 suspicious alerts, followed by tennis at 74, and then esports and table tennis at 34 apiece. 54 of those alerts resulted in sanctions being imposed, including 10 players and 6 umpires being involved from the world of professional tennis. The IBIA, which is licensed to operate in Ontario's open and competitive online sports betting market, reported 0 suspicious alerts in Canada. When IC360 Senior Executive Ilkham Hintzer joined me on a recent episode and answered our questions about the recent wave of sports betting scandals, he spoke about his company's partnership with Sport Integrity Canada to inform and educate stakeholders in our national sports system around match fixing. That conversation, combined with Canadian sports fans selling in to watch over the next 2 weeks some 207 athletes compete at the Winter Olympics in Milan and Cortina, Italy, prompted us to invite to the Gaming News Canada show the President and Chief Executive Officer of Sports Integrity Canada, Jeremy Luke. Jeremy, thanks so much for being here. And we were just talking before I hit the record button. I mean, we had you on the old LinkedIn audio shows back in the day, but this is the first time you've joined us on the podcast. So long overdue to get you here.
Well, thanks very much for the invite and happy to be here.
Hey, Jeremy, it really is. It's great timing to have you to join us. We're recording this on Thursday, February 5th. The pod will drop on the day that Canada and the U.S. are facing off in a highly anticipated preliminary round game in women's hockey at the Olympics. And also the Winter Games are one of 2 tentpole global sporting events in 2026, with the FIFA World Cup, of course, coming to Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. This summer. I would like to start, we were hoping to get you on before the end of 2025 because your organization had gone through a rebrand exercise, no longer the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports and now Sport Integrity Canada. It's a rebrand that made a ton of sense, but I just want to ask you how long a process that was, and really it is an evolution of the organization's mandate.
Yeah, for sure it is. So it's been a couple of years in the making, Steve, where a couple of years ago, we were approached by the former Minister of Sport and Physical Activity, the Honorable Carla Qualtrough, and asked to take on the mandate of safe sport in Canada, which deals with maltreatment and abuse. And that's in light of 2 parliamentary committee hearings exposing that type of maltreatment and abuse, along with the establishment of the Future of Sport in Canada Commission, which was charged at looking at maltreatment and abuse in sport and the sport system as a whole. We were asked to take that work on and do that work along with the work that we were doing in the area of anti-doping and competition manipulation, which I'll get into in a second. But in taking on that mandate, we thought it was really important as an organization to take a step back and to consider the structure of the organization, the way that it was operating, the expertise that we had on the board of directors, and where we thought the organization needed to go to be the most effective that it could be dealing with what we considered to be 3 really big integrity issues. And that was maltreatment and abuse, it's anti-doping, and it's competition manipulation, and in particular, its relationship with gambling in Canada. So to do that, we thought it was important to become more of a regulator, to be focused at the national level, to work with the government to try and enhance the authority we have to be able to regulate in these spaces and to educate. And with that came a desire to change the name of the organization so that it's, it speaks more directly to the work that we're doing going forward as an independent regulatory body. So in December or late November, we officially changed the name of the organization. We've launched a new strategic plan, and we're heading down the path of Sport Integrity Canada.
It's funny. I was going to ask you not so funny. I was going to ask you what takes priority right now, given the world we live in. But I mean, it really, there are 3 critical areas. I mean, where we're taping this just hours after we've heard another case of hazing or allegations of hazing involving a junior hockey team in Nova Scotia, I believe. As we talked to you today, there's in the wake of quite a bit of activity around match fixing right now and match fixing scandals. The anti-doping is still obviously a really important issue, especially given the Winter Olympics taking place right now. I just wonder, Jeremy, we've known each other, I think, almost 5 years now since we started covering this industry, and just, not only the rebranding, but I have to believe there has been an evolution in terms of resources and adding people and you mentioned competition manipulation and the education programs you're doing is still relatively new, but how has that evolution affected the way you staff up your organization?
Well, you're absolutely right. There are three really critical integrity issues. I think what's also important is to recognize that they're interconnected in many ways. So having one centralized independent agency in Canada that can deal with these issues is really important, because what can be competition manipulation can also be abuse, and what can be doping can also be abuse. And how you go about trying to deal with these issues through rules and regulations, but also through education. It's really important to have one organization manage those things. So that's a critical component. But it has resulted in growth of the organization and growth of the resources that are needed to the organization, which, we've been very fortunate to have the support of the government of Canada as we've moved in this direction, and them seeing the need for the organization to move in this direction. But it's also important to have the right expertise, and that at times can be a bit of a challenge in the space that we work in. As an example, in the area of competition manipulation, understanding the gaming industry, understanding the role of betting operators and regulators within the space, also understanding the role of law enforcement and organized crime and how those things intersect with the work that we do, as well as in the area of safe sport and understanding maltreatment and abuse and understanding trauma-informed approaches and how to investigate these issues. It does require a unique skill set and experience, and it's been a challenge, but at the same time, we've been really fortunate to recruit a lot of really strong individuals with expertise in those areas to help us drive forward our new strategic plan and our new brand.
Hey, Jeremy, in the newsletter, we post a lot of jobs every week. I just wonder, what the kinds of people that you've brought into the organization, what are their backgrounds? Where are you tapping into, whether it's schools or getting people to leave other industries? What are the kind of people you're hiring these days?
It's quite diverse, to be honest. It's less focused on sport, so less a focus on individuals who work in sport, and more a focus on the areas of expertise that we're talking about. So, to give you an example, we have a number of individuals who have joined the organization from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, where they worked previously. And with them comes years of experience dealing with sexual exploitation of children online, how that's managed, and being able to bring to the table trauma-informed approaches and running tip lines on investigating these types of things. So being able to tap into expertise like that across the country is really important through different case management approaches and individuals that work in those types of fields, as well as younger people coming out of school who want to join the organization and have a passion for the work that we do, who learn as they join in more junior roles and develop within the organization. So it's a diverse kind of skill set that we're looking for, and we're always looking to try and make sure we can get the word out and advertise in the right places. So if there's a way to do that through your newsletter, I think we'd be certainly open to that.
I spoke off the top about the relationship with IC360, and Elkin Hinser spoke glowingly about the partnership that his company has with Sport Integrity Canada when he was on the podcast a few weeks ago. And I mentioned International Betting Integrity Association. I would think that these these partnerships and relationships and the conversations that you're having with people from those places are really important, because this isn't a situation where one organization or select few people can kind of keep tabs on what's going on, correct?
I couldn't agree more, particularly like in the area of competition manipulation that we're focused on. We've, as I've mentioned to you in the past and publicly many times, there is a desperate need for Canada to ratify what's called the Macolin Convention, which is the Council of Europe's convention for dealing with competition manipulation. But the benefit of ratifying that convention in Canada is it brings together the stakeholder groups you're talking about. It brings together the betting operators and regulators in provinces. It brings together gaming industry. It brings together law enforcement, organized crime, government officials, and the sport sector, because dealing with this particular issue requires all of those individuals at the table. And that's something, frankly, we've continued to struggle with, is being able to get the traction, to get the federal government to move in that direction, which would just help bring these individuals together. And, it's really unfortunate as we think about the World Cup in 2026 in the summer, that the three host countries are three countries that have not ratified the Macolin Convention, which is really disappointing, frankly, given that we are hosting that event in Canada.
Hey, Jeremy, is there a path to do that before the World Cup starts? Like, I just wonder how long the process would be for Canada to sign on to the convention.
No, I think there is a path. I think it just requires, commitment from the federal government to go down that route and to start to put those systems in place. To their credit, they've shown and demonstrated that this is an issue they're concerned about, competition manipulation, and have identified that through funding our organization to deal with these issues. And we've worked really hard to try and bring the stakeholders together that you're talking about to have meaningful conversations about moving in this direction. But ratifying a convention brings, it sets a framework in place for the country to be able to move forward in an intentional way dealing with this. And it links us into 30 other countries that are combating similar issues around best practice, sharing of information and knowledge, all of the things that, when I think back to anti-doping as an example, happened 30 or 40 years ago, which led to the creation of the World Anti-Doping Agency and a harmonized approach to dealing with an issue. That's where we find ourselves in this space. So, that's really important. So hopefully we'll be able to move in that direction.
Ready to accelerate your digital growth? Bede Gaming delivers a market-leading platform with best-in-class products driven by secure, cutting-edge technology. With an open API platform, robust integration suite, and unlimited configurability, you can achieve the ultimate end-to-end customization for your iGaming ambitions. Bede Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at bedegaming.com. Funding is a massive issue in the Canadian sports system these days. I've been pretty vocal on my social media channels about, that it is time for a reset of the Canadian sports system. That's multifaceted, and it includes, safe sport, the new world of competition manipulation and regulated gambling, funding, a different funding model for NSOs. And I just wonder how that affects Sport Integrity Canada. And you've got a pretty broad mandate now. And I would think that there are some financial realities that you're facing today, the organization's facing, that's different than it was 10, 15 years ago.
Very much so. It's, and I think, you think about, the country and where the country, is headed, and the challenges around, finance and budget and government responsibilities. Having adequate funding in the sports sector can be a challenge. I think one of the positive aspects of the Future of Sport in Canada Commission, which I mentioned before, and if your audience isn't familiar, that's a commission that was launched by the former Minister of Sport and Physical Activity to specifically look at the issues of abuse and maltreatment in sport. But it also had, as part of its mandate, to examine the Canadian sports system as a whole and to try to understand improvements to the sports system so that these types of issues aren't happening. And a big part of that improvement needs to be funding, and adequate funding and consistent funding, so that organizations can have the proper governance systems in place and the systems in place to be able to run effectively and efficiently. So I'm hopeful through that commission that some of the recommendations that come forward speak to those things, Steve, and speak to where the funding might be able to come from beyond traditional avenues through the federal government, as an example.
Yeah, it's a good time. Just quickly, Jeremy, to point out that Kirsty Duncan, the former Minister of Sport, passed away 2 weeks ago. I attended her funeral last Friday. Full disclosure, I did some work for Kirsty in the minister's office back in 2018, 2019 around a bipartisan committee looking at youth concussions and youth sports. And Kirsty's been was a big driver for change in the sports system, and especially on that safe sports side. So just want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to the work she did on that file.
Yeah, I fully support that, Steve, and our organization issued a brief statement acknowledging that as well, that the sports system is certainly indebted to her and the work that she did to drive forward some of these hard discussions that are needed in Canadian sport around what's happening and how to improve the system and ensure that people who participate in sport get the maximum benefits out of it and aren't harmed as a consequence of it. So it's good to recognize that accomplishment.
Hey, Jeremy, before off camera, we were talking about the Olympics. You're not going to Milan Cortina, but Sport Integrity Canada does have a presence there. Wouldn't mind spending a few minutes just on what your involvement has been with Team Canada and what your people on the ground are going to be doing over the next couple of weeks?
Sure, happy to. So we play a large role in preparing Team Canada to go to the Olympics. And we do that through the 3 program areas that I was speaking to you before about. In the area of anti-doping, it's a significant amount of testing of athletes, both in competition and out of competition and lead up to the games, as well as mandatory education that athletes go through prior to going to the Olympics related to anti-doping rules and responsibilities. In the area of competition manipulation, it's focused on education. Standardized module that was created, and the Canadian Olympic Committee requires participants to go through prior to going to the game, so they have an understanding of the IOC rules around competition manipulation, around who you can bet on, who you can't bet on, those types of things. And in the area of safe sport, we have focused on education as well. That's mandatory for all athletes and participants attending those games and being on call to be able to deal with any issues that might surface during those games. So that's the work that we've done with the Canadian Olympic Committee and the Canadian team. And then we have individuals on site in Milan Cortina who are mainly performing anti-doping responsibilities, helping collect urine and blood samples from athletes around the world, and helping with operational requirements related to the planning and executing of that anti-doping work. And that's largely related to the leadership role Canada's played internationally in the space of anti-doping. The hosting of the Vancouver Games back in 2010 and the work that we did there continues to translate into a request from Olympic organizers that we send individuals to help with the programs that are being run at the games, and we're really proud to do so.
I have to think that the conversations around match fixing have changed a little bit, given PASPA being overturned in 2018. There's a large regulated environment in North America now. As I pointed out a few minutes ago, we have had some fairly high profile betting scandals. I just wonder, Jeremy, what the conversations were like leading up to these Olympics, and is it something that's more aware of athletes? And I think you and I, in the early days of our relationship, we talked about, Olympic sport, there being opportunities for potential problems, because you are talking about sports that don't have a lot of eyeballs on it. You look at biathlon and some, the cross country skiing, like a lot of these events there's not a lot of focus on them until the Olympics take place every 4 years, and those athletes and coaches, I think, are susceptible to being approached to throw or fix outcomes or events within those outcomes. So have those conversations changed a bit?
I would say over the last 4 or 5 years that the general awareness level of competition manipulation in Canada anyway has increased significantly. So within Canadian sport, 4 or 5 years ago, if you raise this issue, I think few people would know, what is it you're talking about? Is it really a risk? Do we need to be concerned with it? I think fast forward to today, that awareness level is higher. We're doing a better job of educating athletes and sport participants about the risks associated with competition manipulation and how it might happen. But I still think the threat that it poses is not seen at a level that I think it should be, at least in Canada and among Canadian sport organizations and the Canadian public. And that's work that we'll continue to do to try to really elevate that and make the point that when you read about betting scandals that may be coming out in the United States, for example, in the NCAA or in other areas, I would argue it's the tip of the iceberg and that there's more happening and that we need to be doubling down on our efforts to deal with this issue, or we'll find ourselves in a situation where there's another federal government commission examining the issues related to competition manipulation and gambling and how did we let this happen. So trying to get ahead of it as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point, Jeremy. You look at the NCAA scandals, and again the IBIA report, which table tennis isn't a marquee sport, and a lot of these tennis and soccer cases, we're not talking about the Australian Open or Wimbledon or the Premier League or the Champions League. These tend to be second tier tennis events. The satellite tournaments that the International Tennis Federation operates, and second and third and fourth tier soccer leagues around the world. So I think for athletes who their center stage is once every 4 years in sports that don't get a lot of coverage, those athletes are susceptible to being approached by the wrong people.
Yeah, absolutely. See, I mean, as we think about a risk assessment related to this issue, which is the way we approach it, athletes who are in sports that have lower levels of income potential are certainly at a far higher risk for competition manipulation, because as people likely know, competition manipulation as it relates to gambling anyway, is often done by individuals trying to coerce people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. So if you intentionally lose a point in a tennis match, you may be paid a certain amount of money and you do it, and then all of a sudden you've been groomed and brought into some sort of organized crime syndicate that's happening that you want nothing to be a part of. And unfortunately, that's the type of thing that happens in this space. And with the legalization of single event sport betting and prop betting and the ability to manipulate just small parts of a competition in sports like tennis, as an example, or soccer, where that can be done, a lot easier than it can in other sports, there's a real risk for individuals who participate in those sports who make little amounts of money to be, manipulated into doing those types of things. And, college sport in the US would be an example of that.
In terms of the Olympics, Jeremy, what is the relationship between SIC and the Canadian Olympic Committee? Like in terms of these Winter Games, does the COC play a leadership role in working with Sport Integrity Canada on the education and information piece for athletes, and not just athletes, but other stakeholders?
They do. So we're just to be clear, we're Sport Integrity Canada is an independent organization governed by a 12-person board, expert-based non-representative board. We have no individuals on our board from the Canadian Olympic Committee or from the government of Canada or from any sport organizations. And we're structured that way in order to protect us against influence from, sport organizations who have a desire to win medals, presumably, and government who might have the same sort of thing. So our relationship with the Canadian Olympic Committee, they are a separate organization from us, but we collaborate with them, and that relationship works really, really well, where we design education modules and materials, and the Canadian Olympic Committee mandates those for Canadian athletes. And we work really closely with them to ensure that both Team Canada is prepared for when it attends an Olympic Games for the types of things that might happen at those games, and ideally so that Canada has confidence in the team that we're sending around not being caught up with these types of issues.
I want to ask you for specifics here, Jeremy, but I do wonder, have there been conversations between you and people like David Shoemaker, the head of the Canadian Olympic Committee, or head of NSOs, where they have targeted questions around match fixing that might not have been the case when you first joined the organization?
Very supportive. So the Canadian Olympic Committee has supported our last international symposium on competition manipulation financially. They've been supportive in helping us financially develop resources and tools to be able to combat this issue, and have been a big supporter in recognizing the issue and wanting to try and drive awareness in the Canadian sport community. And the IOC has done much the same, frankly, where they've created the International Olympic Committee Code on Competition Manipulation, which is a code that countries can use to set rules that would be consistent with the IOC. So they've very much, I would say, supported the work that we do as an organization, and have raised this issue as being one that the Canadian sport community needs to pay attention to.
Hey, Jeremy, does the Canadian Olympic Committee, do they have, or the IOC, are there rules where, in the NFL, for example, NFL players are allowed to bet on other professional sport leagues? I just wonder, are there some black and white rules that could a curler at the Olympics bet on the hockey competition, or what are the guardrails that are in place there?
Yeah, I won't get into the specifics of the rules just because I don't want to accidentally misquote them for you on your show. But the International Olympic Committee has a code that deals with competition manipulation, which is enforced during the Olympic Games. And it sets out very clearly what the requirements are on all participants at those games. And when it comes to betting, what you can bet on, what you can't bet on, and how that works. That code's available on their website that people can go and see. And that code is what we educate athletes on, and sport participants, coaches as well, others that go to the games, to make sure that they understand what rules are in place during the Olympic Games around this. Because the last thing we want is people to inadvertently get caught up in something simply because they weren't aware of those rules. So part of this is about making sure they understand this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, as well as understand if someone approaches you in a scenario like we were talking about before, who do I report that to? Where do I go? How do I seek help? And that the education modules outlines that as well.
We'll make sure we'll find that link for the code, Jeremy, and we'll include it in the Substack post that goes out with the podcast when it's published. The other thing too is that I wonder if there's a component of your education around mental health and addiction, because we see that there are a lot of reporting out there that there's been an increase in gambling addiction with more access to online sports books. I think especially because of the digital online component, and we know the way athletes are wired, and so is part of that education just talking about mental health and possible addiction?
It does. So there's part of the education that we offer to be able to direct people to where they can seek assistance regarding the issues that you're talking about, which is important. I think there's also a need, more generally around the issue of betting and gambling on sports in Canada, and ensuring that athletes and maybe coaches more specifically are educated about how to deal with some of those issues that may present themselves. And this would be, beyond competition manipulation, just responsible gambling, and the fact that players on the team may be gambling, like not to manipulate the outcome of competitions, but it is different now as far as access to gambling, legalized single event sport betting, and young people, and in particular athletes who participate in that activity, and wanting to make sure that to the extent sport can provide an avenue to educate and to ensure people are doing it responsibly, that can happen.
Do you think there's been enough support from the gaming industry, Jeremy? We have like almost 50 operators plus OLG in Ontario now. Alberta's going to go to an open and competitive industry sometime, we expect in 2026. Is there more that the gaming industry can do as it relates to funding or other means of support for what you're doing?
I think the fact that the single event sport betting was legalized or the prohibition was removed in Canada, our organization supported that. We supported that on the basis that it was happening anyway, frankly, and better to legalize it and regulate it in a professional manner within the country. So that's the starting point. Then the question I think you're raising is, are we doing enough to protect against the harms that may come along with that, if this is essentially a harm reduction type of strategy? And I think there's some certainly good steps that are being put in place through the AGCO and others around regulations and education and monitoring these types of things. But I'd have to say, I think far more needs to be done on the education side around ensuring that individuals who are growing up in Canada and now exposed to the level of advertising and exposed to, the opportunities to bet on sport are also provided with the tools to make sure that it can be done in a responsible way.
Yeah, and I think something you and I talked about when we first met 4 or 5 years ago was that in a regulated environment, there was a better chance that you were going to catch cases of match fixing. And I think the proof's been in the pudding. I just had, I wonder, has your mind changed since those conversations we had, or am I on the right track here?
No, I would agree with you, Steve. So I think like the fact that these cases are being exposed, like the ones we talked about in the United States, just as an example anyway, in some of those areas, or through some of the professional leagues, I think speaks to the effectiveness of the policy and the regulation, and that this stuff's being uncovered and it's being reported on. So I think that's really positive. And with legalization and regulation, we're able to then be able to deal with the issue of competition manipulation far more effectively. What I would hope is that it goes to the point of the ratification of the Macolin Convention, now that we have legalized and regulated sports betting, so that we can ensure we have all of the systems and the processes in place to be able to protect people from that issue.
Do you find, Jeremy, that do you get more questions now about match fixing and people that want to understand, regulated gambling markets and how competition is being manipulated? And again, we have a lot of people that watch this podcast, read the newsletter, and they have questions about prop betting. And of course, right now there's a lot of attention being paid to the development of prediction markets and offering, essentially sports wagering with the Kalshis and Poly markets of the world. But do you find that you and your office are getting more questions now about sports betting than ever?
Yes, I would say so. There's a far higher level of awareness around the issue and people contacting us. So I think that's really positive. What I find interesting is that while there's a high level of awareness around competition manipulation, or what people might think of what that actually means, when you start to have a conversation around how this works, people seem to be quite surprised when you explain that the risks in sport can be as simple as, who is going to have the first offside kick in a soccer match, and that that then is bet on somewhere in Asia to a large extent, and that how that's connected to what we're talking about through the risks to athletes and how easily that can happen, and what we're trying to do around educating people, around educating athletes and participants. I think that's part of this, there's maybe not as high a level of awareness that it can happen that easily. We're not talking about fixing the outcome of a game. We're talking about, mainly anyway, about manipulating parts of competitions that can be wagered on in other jurisdictions around the world.
Hey, I want to finish, Jeremy, just about the World Cup this summer, and I just wonder what if Sport Integrity Canada, if there's any role with regards to Canada Soccer or the kind of work that you might be doing to educate and inform athletes, officials, other people in this country are going to be involved in the staging of that tournament.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're involved in educating athletes participating in the event for sure. And we're on some working groups internationally that will be monitoring the World Cup through something called the Group of Copenhagen, which is part of the Council of Europe. So we can sit as an observer on that, not as a country that's ratified the convention. So there's ways for us to be able to try to participate and to assist and frankly to learn as well with that event coming to Canada. So there's benefits to it. And hopefully it can also be used as a bit of a impetus with the government of Canada to continue to really put, a priority on this particular issue, given that I think FIFA might be, or the World Cup might be, the most heavily wagered upon event in the world, and it's coming to our country. So I'm really hoping that it serves as an opportunity to say in Canada, let's ratify the Macolin Convention and take a few steps further down this path to protect sport participants from this particular risk.
Hey, Jeremy, last question. I just wonder, given the work that the organization is doing around match fixing now and education, like, is there another layer, or is there something that you're looking at introducing sometime this year or over the next 18 to 24 months to enhance the work that you're already doing in that area?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. We're in the process of finalizing a set of rules in Canada, which are mirrored off of the International Olympic Committee's code on competition manipulation, which I mentioned earlier. We're taking that document and have created a set of rules for Canadian sport organizations to put in place within each sport. So it would be similar to anti-doping rules or safe sport rules. This would be a set of rules that can be consistently applied across all federally funded sport organizations around kind of what you can bet on, what you can't bet on, mandatory education, how you report things, how they're investigated. And we hope to launch that in the spring of this year, which will be, a really big step forward in protecting athletes at the national level from this particular issue and making sure that they're aware of it and they have avenues to be able to report it. So we're excited to be launching that in the spring.
And I think SBC Summit Canada is taking place in May, and I think the last time your organization hosted a competition manipulation summit was 2023. But I mean, at the very least, that would be the work that you're doing. That would be a great conversation to hear about at the SBC Summit Canada, unless Sport Integrity Canada's got some plans to bring back your conference.
Yeah, so the summit in May is a great idea. We are hosting a national sport integrity symposium in June in Ottawa, June 3rd and 4th, which will focus on all three of the issues I talked about, maltreatment and anti-doping, as well as competition manipulation. But there will be a dedicated half-day session on competition manipulation, kind of where we were, where we find ourselves today, and where we want to go. And this is bringing government together, bringing our sport leaders together. And if there's individuals from the gaming sector that can contribute to that discussion, they'd certainly be welcome as we try to continue down the path of ensuring Canada can protect sport participants from this risk.
That's great. That is Jeremy Luke, the president and CEO of Sport Integrity Canada. Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much for the conversation. Great information, and let's stay in touch, and maybe there's some news at some point this year along the Macolin Convention lines. But if not, certainly look forward to seeing you probably in May at the SBC Summit Canada.
No problem at all, Steve. Thanks for having us on your show.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. You can listen to this conversation on the various podcast apps. You can also watch my interview with Jeremy on the Gaming News Canada YouTube channel. Thanks again to our loyal listeners for your support of this show, and we will see everybody again very soon.